Well, we're joined now by Marco Vicenzino, who's an international affairs analyst. Thanks very much indeed for joining us here on the Arise News Hour. So, how significant is this meeting? Is it more symbolic than anything else?
It's called highly symbolic, but not historic. The term historic is being used quite often in the media. Symbolic in the sense that, yes, you have the first meeting. You'll be having the first meeting of two heads of state of the United States and Cuba since the 1950s, but not historic because, realistically speaking, until you have the lifting of the embargo, really the status quo doesn't change much.
But nevertheless, how much will this meeting potentially open the door, not just for America and Cuba, but for the rest of the world who feel that they can now move closer to Cuba?
So the purpose of Obama's outreach, his policy of engagement, ultimately is to alleviate the conditions, the political and economic conditions of the Cuban people. The reality is, since this opening began on December 17th of 2014, it's been 4 months, but within 4 months we've seen increased arrests. We haven't seen any change in the parts of the Cuban government, and Raul Castro said clearly nothing is going to change in Cuba, particularly in the area of political reform.
But is Cuba in a way going to be pushed towards doing more of America's bidding, because the aid they'd been getting in terms of the subsidies on oil, which had come from Venezuela, that situation is now so dire there that it needs the American dollar, doesn't it?
But with the critics of Obama saying that as the situation gets worse for Cuba, Cuba will implode, so just leave it to its own devices. On the other hand, the president's saying, provided with a soft landing over time, and things will be in a better situation. But once again, when the process of negotiations is give and take. Now, if you start to alleviate, certainly, so you extend, for example, removing Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism. That's a process of give and take. Now, Cuba, ultimately, it still clearly supports the ELN and the FARC, the terrorist movements, Colombian terrorist movements. Secondly, you have illegal shipments to North Korea, which the United Nations clearly condemned and unequivocally condemned in 2014. And you still have an American citizen who gunned down a New Jersey state trooper in the early 70s, still being harbored by Cuba. And Raul Castro's made it clear they're not going to give her up. So outreach is good, engagement is good, but there has to be a policy of give and take. And in 4 months, we've seen quite a bit of giving on the part of the Obama administration, but not much on Castro's side. So it's not that I'm against engagement. It has to be a process of give and take, and that's not taking place so far.
So given what you've just said, how brave a decision was this on the part of President Obama to try to fundamentally change the relationship with Cuba?
I don't know if you call it brave. He's also in search of legacy. We have to be honest here and have to be clear. The Iran engagement is a 10-year process, and that's a collective process. It involves a permanent 5 of the Security Council, United Nations Security Council, plus Germany, and that gradually is bearing fruit. We have a framework, and now you're going to see the next 3 months is the real difficult process. Once again, it's been a process of give and take with Iran. On this side, I don't know if you call it brave. One would have to say that we go back to that sense of optimism. One wants to be optimistic, but one also has to be realistic.
No, but the truth is that there's bound to be a lot of resistance to this move towards Cuba. There already is in America.
In the U.S. Congress in particular. And once again, until you have the lifting of that embargo, any other further moves will be mostly symbolic.
So does that push President Obama, into a corner?
I don't know if that pushes him to a corner. He sets himself into a corner because it's clear already that the Republican Congress is not going to lift the embargo. What he's doing is maybe saying, I'm beginning a crack in the embargo for history and for my own legacy, and beginning a process so years down the road, when if the embargo is ever lifted and the situation changes in Cuba, part of his legacy, you can say, I began the initial crack in that process.
I was reading that a lot of American companies like the Googles of this world, that they're sort of starting to investigate what the potential might be for Cuba. Do you think that's a little premature then, given everything
They have been investigating for years, in my opinion. They've been waiting on the sidelines, many companies. But once again, Cuba, it's a population of 11 million people, generally the size of the Dominican Republic. It's not going to make or break multinational companies' profits. There's other areas in the world where they can make money. If the situations are right and the situations are ripe in the sense that to go in, I think, yes, they will go in eventually. But once again, they limited that by embargo. And also, when you look from a profit perspective, it's not a highly lucrative market as of yet.
Right. I know you touched on this, but what needs to happen next to move things into higher gear?
I mean, I think there needs to be release of political prisoners as a gesture on the part of the Cuban administration, of the Castro administration. A lot of the political repression. So it's not just releasing of hostages, releasing of political prisoners. Is actually creating the conditions whereby you can have a gradual evolution in the Cuban political process, increasing the basic freedoms, the freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, things like that are not taking place. And also on the economic side, although the Cuban government is tinkering with some opening on the economic front, they're ultimately done to preserve the status quo. So they're just giving people a bit of breathing room in terms of entrepreneurs. There needs to be a massive opening of that, in my opinion, in terms of opening political and economic. But that's far from, that's not going to take place anytime soon, in my opinion.
Marco Vicenzino, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.